Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. This Friday, Showtime premieres the new 4-part docuseries Deadlocked: How America Shaped the Supreme Court. I spoke to acclaimed documentary filmmaker Dawn Porter about her approach to the series and why today's political events aren't normal in the scope of American history. Hey, Dawn Porter. Hey, thank you so much for joining us on WTOP in DC.
Love being back here. I lived in DC for 10 years.
Absolutely, and we can talk about that for sure. We're talking because your new Showtime docuseries premieres this Friday on Showtime and will roll out, I guess, in weekly installments. It's called Deadlocked: How America Shaped the Supreme Court. And yeah, let's dive in sort of with what you mentioned about your local ties, your backstory. I know you went, I guess you're from the Bronx area, but you went to Georgetown Law School. So obviously this series about the Supreme Court, like, was there always a fascination with our legal system, but then also I'm sure recent events too in the last, administration and how it's just drastically shaken up the court. I guess, are those two things combined to why you wanted to do this now?
They are exactly combined. So I moved to Washington, like many people, I'm sure in your audience, right out of college. And I was all like bright-eyed and, excited about being in the nation's capital and, as a young person. And then I worked for a couple of years and then I went to Georgetown Law School. I lived on Capitol Hill and I lived on East Capitol Street. So I used to walk past the court. Georgetown Law is over by Union Station, and so I used to walk past the court, every day on the way to school. And every person who lives in the DC metro area can attest to, we are lucky to be able to see where all of the decisions affecting our country are made and
Right.
to be reminded of our history on a daily basis. But most people are not, most people aren't reminded of the kind of grandeur and imposing structures.
It happens
And
in some far off place in their mind. They don't understand. It's
yeah,
living, breathing
yeah,
place that's people making these decisions.
exactly. So the Supreme Court was always that for me. It was a living, breathing place, and I could picture the people inside making decisions, and I would stand in line and hope to get in. I never got in, to see an argument because there's no cameras in the court. So,
Yeah.
when you think about the court's power comes from us. It comes
Mhm.
from the people. It comes from our willingness to obey and abide by decisions. And so, that to your, you know, other point, that's why I wanted to make this to say, um, it's our, we need to understand what's happening and how we got here. And so that's why really happy Showtime gave us 4 hours to kind of trace that history and talk about where we've been and where we're going and where we are.
That's awesome. And I want to set this up properly because we have Republican and Democratic listeners of WTOP, of course. But I wanted to just sort of tee it up like any sports rivalry. You might be a DC football fan and you hate the Cowboys or Red Sox, Yankees, or Celtics, Lakers, whatever. Heated rivalries. You have your team, but we want fair rules we want the same to be playing by the same rules, right? And so for all these years, we've had, if a justice dies, they get replaced. And that's sort of what, if a Republican or Democrat's in office, that's sort of how it always has been. So talk about how in recent years that just completely went out the window when you had, conservative Justice Scalia died in February 2016 during Barack Obama's term, tried to get Merrick Garland in there, but blocked by the Republicans. Oh, we can't do it during an election year. Okay.
263 days. There were 263 days until the election.
Juxtapose that with what happened when Donald Trump was in office. Not 3 appointments, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and then with Coney Barrett,
23
RBG died
days.
in, what was it, 23?
23 days. We were already voting. 23
Yeah,
days.
I just think that the juxtaposition is crazy of RBG dying in September and getting rammed through a third one, whereas, they wouldn't even let Garland in with almost a whole year before the election.
Well, because it's a political town, I'll start by offending a whole lot of your listeners by saying, yes, I don't like the Cowboys. Like, who could like the Cowboys?
I mean, hey, I'm with you. We want Dallas RFK Stadium shaking the bleachers.
Exactly. I lived near RFK. I felt those bleachers shake. My sister is a Cowboys fan, inexplicably.
Wait, did you go to those games? Did you go to
Oh
Joe
yeah.
Gibbs?
Oh yeah. 100%. 100%. In fact, at the law firm we represented, though, Washington football team. And I got to go to practice sessions, Charlie Casserly. And so, yeah.
But big John Riggins, big Doug Williams, Mark Rippon, all three Super Bowls.
Doug Williams.
You were there for all of them.
I know the song even, but I'll spare you.
We'll just say fight for old DC.
Fight for old DC. Yeah, exactly. So, this is what you're talking about are some of the issues that we kind of go through across the series. And, I want to say like there's a lot of news coming out about the Supreme Court. It feels like almost daily. We are literally a week away from the court beginning its new term. And so you're going to start hearing more and more about the court. And what we wanted to do was something different. We wanted to give you the history so you understand how we got to today. So we start with the Warren Court. We start with that court. The Warren Court is really what most people thought of until today. They thought of the court that gave us Brown v. Board of Education. They thought of the court that gave us Miranda warnings, the court that gave us the right to an attorney in Gideon v. Wainwright. So that's and I wanted to start there because we don't have enough good news and we're not remembering what the court can do. And we should remember it because it's really important and it's unlike any place in the world. And we should be proud of that.
So that's this week's episode, right? The hearts of men can be changed this Friday when they tune in. Yeah, do a deeper dive in. Actually, let's go chronologically through the episode. So episode 1, this is what you're talking about: Loving versus Virginia, Brown versus Board, Thurgood Marshall. Let's talk about this a little more about what we're going to see this week.
When you think of the legacy of Thurgood Marshall, Marshall won 29 of the 32 cases that he argued before the court before he became a justice. That's right, 29 of 32. He is literally the architect of desegregation in this country. Case by case, Marshall and the lawyers that worked with him continued to work to desegregate this country. And it is the Supreme Court that delivers a lot of those actual decisions. So we go really extensively through Marshall's history, how he gets appointed, but what he did, before, and then how Lyndon Johnson is determined to appoint the first Black justice. What happens is another really important facet of American history, which is Earl Warren is appointed to the Supreme Court. And when I say appointed, I mean appointed. Warren had no confirmation hearing, which is really shocking to most people.
Wow.
A justice dies. And so Earl Warren was the governor of California. He wasn't even a practicing lawyer.
Yeah.
And he was promised a Supreme Court. So I guess affirmative action is okay for some people. So
yeah, in the episode, it's Eisenhower made a promise to him, right? That he's going to get it regardless.
He's going to get it. And so the spot that opens up happens to be the spot of the Chief Justice. And so that's the job that he gets. And he goes and he says, and if any of you have worked in DC, he walks around the Senate office buildings, he shakes hands with the men, and then he gets the job. That was his job interview.
Different time, man.
Different time. It wasn't clear that Earl Warren was going to become the liberal, progressive lion that he became. Right. Earl Warren, as governor of California, signed the authorization to intern, Japanese Americans. So the civil rights community was not sure about this guy, Earl Warren, who got the job from Eisenhower, the war president.
He regretted that later in life, too. Yeah, everyone
knows. He did regret that.
Yeah, everyone knows the Warren Commission about JFK assassination and all that. But I think a lot of people forget that he was the one there for Brown versus Board and Loving versus Virginia and then, and all that. So.
And all of those cases showed us what the power of the court can do. And not only does he do Brown v. Board, but he assures that Brown v. Board is a 9-0 decision. And so being 9-0, what can we think of today that is unanimous? Nothing, right? And so by assuring that decision comes down and it is literally unassailable because all of the justices of our highest court have said separate is not equal. Right. So we go from that history. The Warren Court is working in really turbulent times. And then in episode 2, President-elect Nixon literally campaigns on undoing the Warren Court decisions. And he goes around saying the Warren Court has moved too quickly. It's gone too far to the left, and he's going to appoint justices that are going to literally roll back the clock. And that's what he does. And he wins, largely campaigning on his efforts to remake the Supreme Court. And remake it, he does, although it doesn't quite work out the way that he thinks. But Richard Nixon gets 4 appointments to the Supreme Court.
4 during his term?
4.
Wow.
4. So when you think about that, when people today say, how is this possible that our court is so far right? Well, the building blocks start way before,
Wow.
way before some of these decisions.
So that's next week's episode, on the 29th, September 29th. It's called a Conservative Revolution, and you're saying it's a backlash to the Warren Court and Nixon. You said he actually was. It wasn't just something that happened while he was in office. It was ran on that for the voters in that heated 68. Bobby gets killed. Malcolm, Martin, they're all assassinated. JFK a couple years earlier. So the liberal leaders have basically lost all of their leadership at that point, and Nixon's able to get in there on law and order. We've heard that recently.
That's exactly right. And one of the things that we tried to do in this series is to unearth this archive so you can hear and see for yourself how people were campaigning, what they were saying, what they were doing. So you hear, kind of when Roe v. Wade comes down and Nixon is appalled and he's really angry about the decision. But he does say he supports abortion in some cases. And he says, and we have the audio in the series, for example, when there's a black and a white, he can see that there's a reason for abortions. So, that's why we do documentary, is so that you can see for yourself how people thought, what they said, and what they did. But also, it's really important. I'm not like a canceller, okay? I don't agree with a lot of what Richard Nixon said, but Richard Nixon also gave us the EPA. Richard Nixon also abided by a court. And this is really important to think about, too. When the justices, 4 of whom he had appointed, are confronted with the Nixon Watergate tapes, he steps down. And
can you imagine that today? We're seeing the opposite of that today.
We're seeing the opposite of today. And that's a really big point of this, that what we're seeing today in politics is an anomaly. This is the anomaly. This is the time that is out of step with history. Yes. Before a Richard Nixon, an Al Gore, they accept kind of things that they disagree with. Even if they feel that they are unfair. And that's how our democracy continues. So, the other point I want to make about this is not a parade of liberal commentators trashing the court. So, we have Ted Olson in this series. We have, famed, more conservative, legal, brilliant mind. We have Don Ayers, who was in the Reagan Justice Department, explaining the philosophy of that Justice Department. We have Don Bass, who was a court clerk for Scalia, explaining Scalia's opinions and about how, his opinion about how it's the conservatives' turn. So, but all of the people that we spoke to, regardless of their personal political beliefs, they're all concerned about what they're seeing today. Yeah. And so the series is not to critique decisions. It is to say, how are decisions being made? How are appointments going through? And what can the public do in order to pay attention and to understand what's happening? But so that's episode 2. We go into Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was not controversial. It was 7-2.
And how easy we forget that now. Yeah.
And, another really important thing is the evangelicals at the time were not anti-choice. The evangelicals were actually pro-choice. The way that we go through the evangelical rise to power and what their objectives were, evangelicals, what they wanted to do, and Jerry Falwell very capably does, is align with Catholic voters in order to, what he really wanted was to preserve tax exemptions for segregated schools, because that's what the evangelical Liberty University had a really discriminatory policy. So and the government had taken away tax exemption, and he didn't like that. So he said, well, if we align with the Catholics, whose issue is abortion, and evangelicals, who want to keep their own religious schools, then we have a really powerful voting bloc. And who are we going to support? Instead of supporting the actual evangelical minister, Jimmy Carter, they decided to support the divorced actor, Ronald Reagan. And so
Wow.
the evangelicals and that conservative voting bloc pushes to get Ronald Reagan elected. He
Wow.
too campaigns on the Supreme Court.
On
So
undoing,
and
undoing.
undoing decisions that they didn't like
Yeah.
not supporting tax exemption for
Yeah.
religious schools. And so, when people think today that the court is much more political than it has ever been,
Yeah.
of course it's always been political. It's a political system that elects
Right.
the court. We have a president in power. That person gets to choose the nominations. The Senate that's elected gets to approve the nomination. So it's a political system. But what's different today is we're getting much more political results. And that is a big difference
Right.
from our past history.
It is a political, like what we keep returning to. It's like in our sports analogy, the referees are starting to, side with one team more often. We want the justice system and the Supreme Court supposed to be that neutral arbiter that we can all hopefully rely on for these decisions. And and while our political squabbling goes back and forth down here on a lower level, the Supreme Court's supposed to be on high as this non-biased thing, But all right, well, I know we're short on time, but take me really quick into episode 3 and 4. So episode 3, the Rule of Five, comes on October 6th. Where this is what, like the 90s Bush v. Gore 9/11 era
Bush
stuff.
v. Gore, yeah. So in the next 2 episodes, I think some of the things that I'd really love people to focus on are the rise of the Federalist Society and how the Federalist Society has come to become the entity that grooms and delivers justices. So we have 3 justices today who are products of the Federal Society: Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and Gorsuch. So, and we have Justice, Roberts. We have all these guys. It's so interesting. Like when we were looking back at Bush v. Gore, Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and Justice Roberts all were down looking to get President Bush elected. So is that illegal? No. Is it unethical? No. Is it interesting? Yes.
Yeah.
When people say they don't have political, affiliations. But I think what we're seeing today is when he was president, Trump literally hands over his decisions about who's going over to the court to the Federalist Society. And they very determinedly pick people who they think are going to do things like roll back the administrative state. And so you start to get decisions like we had recently that the EPA can't make rules to govern our clean air and water. You have decisions like overturning Roe v. Wade. The justices didn't need to overturn that decision to evaluate the Mississippi ban, which is 15 weeks. They could have just said the ban stays. And that's what Justice Roberts, no flaming liberal, said we don't need to do that. And yet the justices reach back in order to dismantle Roe v. Wade. So, when you, where we started, you and I, in this conversation about the difference between the replacement for Scalia and the replacement for RBG, what we saw there, and you'll see in the series, that the Supreme Court confirmation process got really political after Robert Bork was not confirmed. Mm-hmm. And after that happened, the Republicans were very, very angry. And Mitch McConnell takes to the well of the Senate and he says, "You're not going to confirm this person." But basically he says, "I won't confirm any more liberal Democrats either." And that's exactly what we see. He made good on that promise. So, I hope folks will get kind of a travel through time, and they will, understand that our history is going to be repeated if we do not understand it.
Wow. Yes. And a lot of that stuff you're mentioning is Crisis of Legitimacy, episode 4 on October 13th. So it's going to be 4 great weeks to check out and learn all your history. And again, folks, this is Dawn Porter we're talking about. We're talking about AFI Docs Guggenheim Symposium's Dawn Porter. We're talking Gideon's Army and Trapped and Bobby Kennedy President and what is it? John Lewis, Good Trouble, The Way I See It. And then one that blew my mind was Rise Again, Tulsa and the Red Summer. I mean, you talk about stuff I was never taught in school, and then you're teaching all of us. I'm rural Maryland growing up. I didn't know about any of this stuff, and it's blowing my mind. So it's calling us all to action. Keep up the great work. I really appreciate you joining us. It's called Deadlocked: How America Shaped the Supreme Court, this Friday on Showtime. Thanks so much for your great work. Keep it up.
Thanks. I love being here. And of course, I love being home.
Fight for all, DC. See ya. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us on Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time.